Imagine you wake up tomorrow morning, you grab your phone, open your banking app, and there's nothing. Not $0, not a freeze notice, just access denied. You try your card at the gas station, declined. You try a different card, declined. You call your bank, and a recorded voice tells you your account has been flagged. Pending review. No timeline. No explanation. No appeal. You haven't broken any law. You haven't missed a payment. You haven't done anything wrong. But someone or something decided you no longer qualify to participate in the economy. Now here's the question that should be keeping you up at night. What if that scenario isn't a nightmare? What if it's a blueprint? And what if the system that makes it possible is already built, already tested, and already running beneath the surface of the world you live in every single day? Because here's what most people don't realize, and what this video is going to show you. The infrastructure to control who can buy and who can sell has been quietly assembled piece by piece over the last 2 decades. And the strangest part? It wasn't hidden. It was built in plain sight. While we were distracted, while we were scrolling, while we were arguing about everything else, the architecture went up around us. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you're going to see something that cannot be unseen. Let's go back, way back. Not to some ancient conspiracy, not to a shadowy room full of powerful men. Let's go back to a book that was written almost 2,000 years ago, on a remote island, by an old man who had been exiled for his beliefs. His name was John, and in the middle of a vision that would shake the ancient world, he described something so specific, so structurally detailed, that modern economists and policy analysts have quietly referenced it without ever acknowledging where it came from. He wrote about a system, a global system, one where no one could buy or sell unless they carried a specific mark of authorization. The language is in Revelation, chapter 13, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Now, before you check out, before you assume this is going somewhere religious or sensational, just stay with me for one moment. Because what John described isn't just a theological event. It's a structure. It's an architecture. It is almost word for word the blueprint of a permissioned economy. And we are living inside the early stages of one. Here's the crazy part. The people building this system don't call it prophecy. They call it progress. Let's talk about cash, because cash is dying. And I don't mean slowly, naturally, like vinyl records dying. I mean it's being actively, intentionally, systematically phased out. And the reasons given are always reasonable. Cash enables crime. Cash is inefficient. Cash is unhygienic. Cash is old. Cash is the past. And sure, some of that is true. But here's what nobody tells you. Cash is also the only form of money that requires no intermediary. It's the only form of payment that cannot be switched off. You hand someone a $20 bill. No server is needed. No approval is required. No account can be flagged. No algorithm can intercept it. The transaction is between two humans and nothing else. Now think about what it means when that's gone. When every transaction, every single purchase, every dollar moved, every cup of coffee, every grocery run, every donation to a church or a cause or a friend runs through a digital system controlled by a central authority. That authority has something it never had before in human history, a kill switch. And that's not speculation, that's engineering, because that's what a centralized payment system is. It's a system with an off button, and that off button can be applied not just to criminals, not just to fraudsters, it can be applied to anyone, for any reason, at any time. Let that sink in. In 2022, something happened in Canada that most Americans forgot about within 2 weeks. But it was, in quiet ways, one of the most significant events in modern financial history. Truckers blocked the streets of Ottawa. They were protesting vaccine mandates. You can agree or disagree with their position. That's not what matters here. What matters is what the Canadian government did in response. They invoked emergency powers and froze the bank accounts of protesters. Not suspects, not criminals, protesters. People who had committed no crime were financially cut off, not just their own accounts, but accounts of people who had donated to them. Regular citizens, people who gave $20 online, their accounts were frozen. And then, quietly without much fanfare, those powers were walked back. But the precedent had been set, the capability had been demonstrated, and the message was received loud and clear by every government economist, every central bank strategist, every policy architect watching from a distance. It works. Now, here's where things get real, because what Canada did clumsily with existing tools that required emergency legislation and public justification, the next generation of systems won't need any of that. The next generation of systems will do it automatically, quietly, algorithmically. And those systems have a name: central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. As of 2024, over 130 countries, representing more than 98% of global GDP, were actively exploring, piloting, or launching digital versions of their national currencies. The Bahamas already launched one. Nigeria launched one. China's digital yuan has been piloted across major cities with tens of millions of users. The European Central Bank has been developing a digital euro. The United States Federal Reserve has been conducting research on a digital dollar. These aren't fringe ideas anymore. These are central bank policy documents. These are IMF working papers. These are congressional hearings. And here's what makes a CBDC fundamentally different from the digital money you use today. Because I know what you're thinking. I already use digital money. I use my debit card. I use Venmo. I use Apple Pay. What's different? Here's the difference. And it's the difference that changes everything. The digital money you use today flows through private banks. Your bank holds your money. Your bank can be held accountable. Your bank competes for your business. If your bank treats you badly, you can move. There's a layer between you and the central government. A CBDC eliminates that layer. With a CBDC, your money is held directly by the central bank. The government is your bank. And built into that infrastructure, by design, by the engineers who are writing these systems right now, is programmability. That word, programmability, remember it. Because a programmable currency is not just money. It's money with conditions attached. It's money that can be told where it can go, what it can buy, when it expires, who is authorized to receive it. In a 2021 speech, the head of the Bank for International Settlements, the central bank of central banks, the institution that coordinates global monetary policy, explicitly described this feature. He said, and I'm paraphrasing closely, "Unlike cash, a CBDC gives central banks absolute control over the rules and regulations that determine the use of that currency." Absolute control. He didn't say that ominously. He said it like it was a feature. And to a monetary economist, maybe it is. But to a citizen, to you, what does absolute control over the use of your money actually mean in practice? It means someone else decides what your money is for. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, because we have to talk about social credit systems. Most people have heard of China's social credit system and filed it away under "that's China," meaning it's a problem for over there, not over here. But that thinking has a very short shelf life. China's system assigns citizens scores based on behavior, financial behavior, social behavior, online activity. If your score drops below a threshold, access to certain services is restricted. Travel is restricted. In some cases, your children's educational opportunities are restricted. Now, China's system is extreme. It's the fully realized version. But the components that make it possible, they're not Chinese inventions. They're universal technologies: facial recognition, biometric data, digital identity systems, behavioral data harvested from smartphones, centralized payment records. These are global technologies, and many of them are being quietly integrated into Western systems right now. Not as a social credit system, that framing would cause too much resistance. They're being integrated as convenience features, as fraud prevention, as security upgrades, as digital identity programs. In the European Union, the digital identity wallet, eIDAS 2.0, is being rolled out to create a unified digital identity for every EU citizen, linked to a single credential that can authenticate across services, both public and private. In the United States, mobile driver's licenses are now accepted at TSA checkpoints in multiple states. building the infrastructure for a standardized digital ID system. In the UK, the government has been pushing a digital identity framework that links identity verification to financial accounts, employment records, and public services. None of these are secret. They're all in government policy documents. They're all publicly announced. That's the surreal part. The architecture of a permission society, a society where access to economic life requires continuous digital authorization, is being built openly. In the news, in policy papers, in budget line items. You see what's happening here? Let me bring this back to the ancient text for a moment, because I think most people, even people who grew up in churches, even people who know this passage by heart, have fundamentally misunderstood what Revelation 13 is describing. For generations, the interpretation of the mark of the beast has been almost cartoonishly literal. A tattoo, a barcode, a microchip implanted in the hand or forehead. And I'm not here to tell you those interpretations are impossible. But I am here to suggest that maybe the writers, the scholars, the theologians spent so long debating the form of the mark that they missed the function of it. Read it again. That no man might buy or sell. That's the function. The function is economic exclusion. The function is a two-tier society, those who are authorized to participate in commerce and those who are not. The mark isn't the point. The mark is just the mechanism of authorization. It's the credential. It's the permission slip. And now in 2025, we live in a world where your access to payment systems is tied to identity verification. Your identity verification is increasingly tied to biometric data. Your biometric data is increasingly tied to government-issued digital credentials. And those credentials, in the systems being built right now, can be revoked. The form has changed. The function is identical. Now think about that. A vision described by a man in exile on the island of Patmos almost 2,000 years ago described a global economic authorization system with such structural accuracy that if you wrote it as a policy proposal today, it would fit cleanly into a World Economic Forum working paper. That's either the most extraordinary coincidence in human history, or it's something else. Here's where most videos like this would pivot into doom, into hopelessness, into fear. But I want to do something different, because the most important thing about understanding a system is understanding how it gains your consent. Because this system, all of it, every piece of it, requires your participation to function. And it gets your participation the same way every system of control has always gotten it throughout human history. Gradually, incrementally, with gifts. Think about how we got here. Nobody forced you to stop using cash. The payment companies made cards more convenient. Then they made cards more rewarding. Then they made phones more convenient than cards. Then they made biometric authentication more convenient than passwords. Then they made one-click purchasing more convenient than multi-step checkout. Every step of the way, convenience was the offer, and comfort was the currency you paid for it. And every step of the way, you gave up something you probably didn't notice you were giving up. You gave up anonymity. You gave up autonomy. You gave up the simple, irreducible power of a transaction between two humans that requires no third party. They didn't take those things. You traded them, and the trade felt good every single time. This is how systems of total control have always been constructed. Not with chains, with comfort. Not with threats, with upgrades. Let me tell you about something called a digital wallet mandate. In Nigeria, when the government launched its CBDC, the eNaira, cash withdrawals from ATMs were capped. Banks were instructed to discourage large cash transactions. The message was clear: use the digital system. And when citizens didn't adopt it fast enough, the pressure increased. Cash became less available, less practical, less reliable. Now, Nigeria is not America, but it is a proof of concept. It is a government demonstrating at national scale that you can use inconvenience and scarcity to drive adoption of a digital currency system. You don't have to force people. You just have to make the alternative painful enough that they choose the new system themselves. And here's the timeline nobody's talking about. These systems, the digital currencies, the digital identities, the programmable wallets, the biometric authentication layers, they don't all have to be connected right now. They just have to be built. They just have to exist. Because once they exist, they can be integrated. Quietly, suddenly, in response to a crisis. Because that's how it always happens. The infrastructure gets built during peacetime, and it gets activated during emergencies. The Patriot Act didn't get passed because the surveillance infrastructure was new. It got passed because the infrastructure already existed and an emergency justified turning it on. So the question isn't, is this system active yet? The question is this system built? And the answer, based on publicly available information from the Bank for International Settlements, the IMF, the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and the governments of over 130 countries, is yes, it's built, it's being tested, it's being refined, and it is waiting. Now here's something that almost nobody talks about when they discuss these systems, and it's the piece that honestly changes everything. It's the network effect. Individual control systems are manageable. If one country builds a digital ID system, people can leave. If one country launches a CBDC, people can use other currencies. If one platform bans you, you go to another platform. The existence of alternatives is the safety valve. The existence of alternatives is freedom. But what happens when the systems are interoperable? What happens when the digital ID in Europe links to the digital ID in the US, links to the CBDC in China, links to the biometric passport system in Africa? What happens when the alternative doesn't exist anymore? Not because it was banned, but because everything has been absorbed into one unified, globally interoperable authorization framework? The IMF has a project for this. It's called the Universal Monetary Unit. The Bank for International Settlements is developing cross-border CBDC infrastructure called Project mBridge. The G20 has been coordinating on digital payment interoperability since 2020. These aren't fringe projects. These are the central banking establishment's most serious institutional efforts, and they are all pointed in the same direction, toward a world where financial participation is global, digital, interconnected, and, by structural necessity, permissioned. In that world, there is no outside. In that world, the alternative doesn't exist. In that world, the off switch doesn't just affect your account, it affects your ability to exist within the only economy there is. That's not a conspiracy. That's the logical endpoint of the architecture being built right now. And this is where it gets very, very quiet in the room, because this is where the ancient text stops feeling like a story from a long time ago and starts feeling like a memo from the near future. And that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark. When John wrote those words, there was no internet. There was no concept of a central bank. There was no concept of a central bank. There was no such thing as a digital transaction. Cryptocurrency didn't exist. Biometrics didn't exist. National identity systems didn't exist. Global financial coordination institutions didn't exist. And yet he described, with functional accuracy, a system in which economic participation is conditional, in which a credential of authorization is required to transact, in which those without that credential are excluded from commerce entirely. Either this is the most remarkable literary coincidence ever produced by human civilization, or the patterns of power, the structures of control that accumulate in human institutions when left unchecked, tend toward the same endpoint regardless of the century in which they operate. And maybe both things are true. Here's the part I need you to sit with, because this is the realization I want you to carry out of this video. The most dangerous aspect of this system, of all of it, the CBDCs, the digital IDs, the programmable money, the biometric authentication, the centralized authorization, is not what it does to criminals. It's what it does to dissent. Every system of total economic control in history has been sold as a system to stop criminals, to stop fraud, to stop crime, to stop terrorism. And in every case, once the infrastructure was in place, the definition of who qualifies as a threat quietly expanded. When access to commerce can be turned off, not by a court order, not by a jury of your peers, not by due process, but by an algorithm, by a policy setting, by an administrative flag raised on your account, then compliance stops being a choice and starts being a survival requirement. Not compliance with law, compliance with whoever controls the algorithm. And that right there is the inflection point. That is the moment when a society crosses a line that is very, very difficult to uncross. Because it's not a dramatic moment. It won't look like a revolution. There won't be soldiers in the street. There will just be a morning when you open your app and something doesn't work. And you'll call someone and they'll tell you it's under review. And you'll wait. And the waiting will teach you something. It will teach you that the most powerful form of control is not punishment. It's the fear of punishment. It's the knowledge that the system is watching and that the wrong move, the wrong association, the wrong post, the wrong donation, the wrong belief could cost you your seat at the table of economic life. That fear, quiet, ambient, invisible, changes behavior more effectively than any law ever passed. It doesn't need to be enforced often. It just needs to exist. So what do you do with this? I'm not going to stand here and tell you the answer is simple. It's not. The systems being built are genuinely complex. The problems they claim to solve, financial crime, identity fraud, monetary instability, are genuinely real. And the people building them are not all villains. Many of them genuinely believe in what they're building. But belief in good intentions has never been a substitute for structural accountability. The question you need to be asking, the question that every citizen, every voter, every person who uses money needs to be asking is not, is this technology useful? The question is, who controls the off switch and what limits their power to use it? Because if the answer to that second question is nothing, there is no independent judiciary, no constitutional protection, no structural limit on the authority of whoever controls these systems, then it doesn't matter how good the intentions were. The architecture of abuse is already in place, and architecture once built tends to be used. Here's what I want you to take away from this. This is not a story about the future. This is not a warning about something that might happen if we're not careful. The infrastructure is already here. The pilots are already running. The policy frameworks are already written. The coordination between central banks is already happening. The question is not, will this system be built? The system is built. The question, the only question that matters, is what we do inside the window that still exists to shape it, to demand accountability, to insist on limits, to hold on to the structural protections, privacy, anonymity, due process, economic freedom, that generations before us paid enormous prices to establish. Because here's what history tells us consistently, without exception. Systems of total control do not begin with villains announcing their villainous plans. They begin with reasonable-sounding solutions to genuine problems. They build gradually. They accumulate. And by the time the danger is obvious enough for most people to see it, the moment to stop it has usually passed. John saw a pattern old as power itself, a pattern of authority that always eventually reaches toward the same thing: control over the most fundamental human activity there is, the ability to survive, the ability to trade, the ability to exist within the economy of your time. And he wrote it down in a book that billions of people own, that billions of people have read, and that somehow, in all those centuries of reading, managed to describe something that the engineers of 2025 are building in their offices right now and calling innovation. The system that controls who can buy or sell is not coming. It's not a prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. It's already here, already assembled, already waiting. The only thing it needs now is the moment to turn on. And I'll leave you with just this one thought, not an answer, not a call to action, just a thought to carry with you. Every generation believed it would recognize evil when it arrived. It would be loud, it would be obvious. It would look different enough from normal life that people would notice in time. Every generation was wrong.